At 3:15 a.m. local time, USS Truxtun, DDG-103, an Arleigh Burke Flight 20IA guided missile destroyer, is holding a picket position 14 nautical miles east of the narrowest choke point in the Strait of Hormuz. The Strait of Hormuz, 21 nautical miles wide at its minimum. Approximately 1/5 of the world's oil transits this geometry every day, or it did before the blockade went up 3 weeks ago. The night around Truxtun is flat. No weather system, no wave state above 2 feet. Stars down to the Iranian horizon on the port side. Bridge watch is running standard darkened ship. No external lighting, infrared sensors active, AN/SPY-1D phased array, painting a full 360-degree picture of everything on the surface and in the air within 200 nautical miles. At 3:17 a.m., the surface picture gets a new contact, bearing 285, range 22 nautical miles, course 110, speed 8 knots. The contact resolves on the SPS-73 surface radar in under 2 minutes. Hull identifier acquired from the AIS transponder, though the AIS signal is intermittent, which is the first flag. The vessel is 280 meters long, draft reading suggesting a fully loaded cargo hull. It is an Iranian flag crude oil tanker, the Sapir Star. Registry, Iranian National Tanker Company. Port of origin, Karg Island Terminal. The cargo aboard the Sapir Star, 800,000 barrels of crude oil at current market rates, is worth approximately $40 million, and she is threading the 6 nautical mile gap between the southern edge of the outbound shipping lane and the Iranian coastal baseline. That is the exact band of water Iran's tanker captains have been using to probe the blockade for 10 days. Iran claims it as territorial waters. The U.S. Navy does not recognize that claim in the current enforcement context. Truxtun's tactical action officer has the contact on her display. Standard doctrine for this scenario is straightforward. A P-8 Poseidon on station overhead issues a radio challenge on Channel 16, the international distress frequency. If the vessel ignores it, a MH-60R Seahawk helicopter orbits low and repeats the challenge. If the vessel continues to ignore and presses toward the line, the next authorized step is standoff interception. Close to engagement range, generate a fire control solution, and request authorization for an SM-6 intercept. The SM-6 costs $5.3 million per round. And there is the trap. The Sapir Star is a commercial hull, no weapons visible. Civilian crew registry. Cargo manifest, crude petroleum, not weapons. Under existing rules of engagement, firing a $5.3 million interceptor at a commercial tanker transiting claimed territorial waters requires a legal opinion from JAG, CENTCOM authorization, and depending on the political temperature of the week, a conversation that works its way up to the Secretary of Defense. Iran's planners built this scenario into their blockade probing strategy with precision. They ran the ROE math. They calculated the authorization floor. They concluded that any tanker running the gray zone at 8 knots under civilian registry and crude oil cargo was below the SM-6 authorization threshold. They were right about the SM-6. They forgot about the gun that has been sitting on the forward deck of every Arleigh Burke since 1991. The most expensive destroyer in the blockade line is about to turn a $40 million Iranian cargo around using a tool that costs less than a night at a hotel in Manama. How that math works and why Iran never saw it coming is what this video is about. Before we go any further, pause for a second. Truxtun's tactical action officer has the Sapir Star on the radar scope. The tanker is threading the gap. The SM-6 authorization clock is going to take hours, and it is probably not going to be granted for a commercial hull under the current ROE architecture. The window is closing. What do you think she does? A. She holds back. The rules of engagement protect the commercial hull, the tanker threads the line, and Iran gets the cargo through. B. She escalates to CENTCOM, requests SM-6 authorization, waits, and the tanker passes the blockade line while the paperwork moves. C. She reaches for a tool in the magazine that does not require CENTCOM authorization, does not cost $5 million, and turns the tanker around in 4 minutes. Drop A, B, or C in the comments. Or write what you would have done at 3 a.m. with a $40 million cargo vessel and a ROE matrix that just took the expensive options off the table. We will see who had it right in 3 minutes. Let me give you the geometry of this intercept, because the shape of the strait is the foundation of everything that follows. The Strait of Hormuz at its narrowest measures 21 nautical miles from the Iranian coast to the Omani coast. Of those 21 miles, the internationally recognized shipping lanes occupy 2 corridors, each 2 nautical miles wide, with a 2 nautical mile median separation zone between them. The inbound lane, used by vessels entering the Persian Gulf, runs along the Omani side. The outbound lane, used by vessels exiting, runs along the Iranian side. That leaves approximately 6 nautical miles of water between the southern edge of the outbound lane and the Iranian coastal baseline. Iran's territorial waters claim extends 12 nautical miles from the baseline. Under that claim, the entire 6 nautical mile gap sits inside Iranian jurisdiction. Under UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, the passage rights are more complicated. The strait qualifies as an international transit corridor, which limits Iran's enforcement rights. But the legal ambiguity exists, and legal ambiguity is exactly what the Separate Star's captain was navigating through. Truxtun was holding in the median zone, the dead space between the 2 shipping lanes, which put her 8 nautical miles from the Iranian coast and 13 from the Omani side. That is the textbook Arleigh Burke position, close enough to challenge anything moving through the outbound lane, far enough that Iranian shore-based anti-ship missile batteries are looking at a non-trivial engagement solution. The Separate Star was not using the shipping lanes. She was threading the gap, staying outside the internationally designated outbound corridor, inside the zone that Iran was betting the U.S. could not legally enforce against. This is not an improvised tactic. We showed you in our video on the USS Carney interdiction that Iranian maritime harassment has followed a consistent escalation testing pattern for the past 18 months. Small boats, civilian registry cargo vessels, fishing dhow flotillas used as intelligence platforms. Every probe is calibrated to stay below a legal or financial threshold that limits the U.S. response. The Separate Star was the highest value application of that doctrine yet attempted in this blockade cycle. $40 million of crude in the most legally protected hull configuration available, and it almost worked. Here is the gap in Iran's model, the one variable their planners did not put in the simulation. The rules of engagement threshold for SM-6 employment against a commercial hull in a contested territorial claim zone is above $5 million. The threshold for Harpoon anti-ship missile employment is similar. The threshold for a VBSS helicopter boarding team insertion into Iranian claim waters creates its own political exposure. Every tool above a certain cost point or escalation level requires authorization layers that take time and produce political consequences. The Mk-45 Mod 4 sits below all of those thresholds. The Mk-45 is a 5-inch, 62 caliber naval gun mounted in a fiberglass housing on the forward deck of the destroyer. It entered U.S. Navy service in 1971. The current Mod 4 configuration, updated in 2000 with a digital fire control system, an improved automatic loading mechanism, and a reduced radar cross-section housing, fires a 70-pound projectile at a muzzle velocity of 2,650 feet per second. Rate of fire, 16 to 20 rounds per minute from a below-deck magazine that holds 600 rounds in an automated handling system. Maximum range on standard ammunition, 22 nautical miles. Against a surface target at 4,000 yards, a trained crew can put a projectile within 15 meters of a designated aim point. If you look at the housing from the outside, it does not look like a gun. It looks like a smooth, rounded equipment pod, low profile, no visible moving parts when stowed, designed specifically to reduce the radar and visual signature of the ship. The barrel extends past the housing only when the system is in action position. By the time the barrel is visible to an observer on the target vessel, the fire control solution is already complete. The Mk-45 carries several round types, high explosive point detonating for direct fire against surface and light armor targets, extended range for longer standoff engagement, and illumination, a round that deploys a pyrotechnic canister on a parachute at a set altitude, burning at 1.4 million candle power for approximately 60 seconds, lighting a 2-kilometer circle of ocean bright enough to individually photograph crew members on deck from 5 miles. The illumination round costs approximately $300, The standard high-explosive round costs approximately $1,200. The commanding officer of an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer has standing authority, without CENTCOM authorization, without JAG consultation, to fire warning shots from the deck gun at a vessel that has failed to comply with a lawful maritime challenge in an area where the U.S. Navy has declared a maritime interdiction operation. That authority is covered under long-standing maritime rules of engagement, the right of self-defense, and international maritime law regarding graduated application of force against non-compliant vessels. One call from the tactical action officer to the commanding officer. Batteries free. The decision took 40 seconds. At 3:26 a.m., Truxtun comes to an intercept course of 285. Engines advance to 22 knots. The forward Mk-45 housing begins a slow, smooth traverse to the bearing of the Sepper Star. At 3:31 a.m., the MH-60R Seahawk lifts from Truxtun's flight deck, not to board the tanker, but to establish a hovering observation platform that will document the entire sequence from 500 feet above the intercept. At 3:33 a.m., Truxtun is at 4,200 yards, roughly 2.5 miles, off the Sepper Star's port side. The tanker is still making 8 knots. The captain either does not see the destroyer or has calculated that the destroyer will not escalate. The fire control computer has the solution. At 3:34 a.m., the first round fires. On the bridge of the Sepper Star, there is no warning before impact. The projectile travels at 2,650 feet per second. The sound cannot outrun the round. The first thing the watch officer knows is a 40-foot white column of water erupting from the ocean surface 80 meters off the port bow. And then, a half second later, a crack that sounds like a transformer explosion and rolls across the water in both directions. Truxtun, possible warning shot, port bow, bearing 105. Confirm. The second round fires at 3:34:22 a.m. The column rises 60 meters off the bow. Third round, 40 meters. Closer still. This pattern has a name in every maritime navy on Earth. A ladder shot. Each round walks in toward the hull. The implication does not need to be stated. The ladder has one more step. The illumination round fires at 3:35 a.m. The flare canister ejects from the Mk-45 barrel, climbs to 1,500 feet over the Sepper Star's position, and opens. 1.4 million candle power. For 60 seconds, the Sepper Star is lit like a sports stadium. Hull number, deck configuration, bridge windows, the faces of crew members who came topside to see what was happening. All of it is now documented in Truxtun's electro-optical archive in high resolution, time-stamped, GPS tagged, and automatically uploaded to the Fleet Common Operational Picture, where CENTCOM can access it within minutes. Position confirmed. Vessel identity confirmed. Navigation track through the interdicted zone confirmed. Violation documented. Graduated force response documented. Total ordnance expended. 6 rounds at $200 each and 1 round at $300. $7,500. At 3:37 a.m., the Sepper Star's bridge initiates a turn to starboard. Speed drops to 3 knots. The tanker begins a course reversal. At 3:41 a.m., Truxtun resumes her picket station. The $40 million cargo did not reach its destination. Now let me run the math on what just happened, because this is where the Truxtun engagement becomes the most important single tactical event of the blockade cycle. We told you 3 episodes ago, in the USS Carney breakdown, about the cost asymmetry problem that has been running against the U.S. Navy in this region for 20 years. Houthi drones at $20,000 each drawing SM-2 intercepts at $2.1 million each. IRGC fast boats at $50,000 provoking Coast Guard and destroyer responses that cost 50 times more just in operating hours. The attrition equation that Iran and its proxies have been exploiting since at least 2019. The model is simple. Your cheap assets make our expensive responses politically and financially unsustainable. You don't have to win the battle. You just drain the magazine. Here is the equation the Sepper Star just generated. On the U.S. side, 6 Mk-45 rounds and 1 illumination flare. Total ordnance cost, $7,500. Truxtun's operating cost per underway hour, fuel, crew, maintenance allocation, Runs approximately $40,000 for an Arleigh Burke. Duration of the intercept engagement, 16 minutes. Operating cost attribution, approximately $10,700. Total U.S. cost for this enforcement action, roughly $18,000. On the Iranian side, $40 million in crude oil did not reach its destination. The Sapir Star burned approximately 15 tons of heavy fuel during the diversion, roughly $9,000 at current bunker prices, plus the delivery contract penalty for a missed consignment, which on a 800,000-barrel cargo runs between $400,000 and $1.2 million, depending on the agreement structure, plus the insurance implications, because every Iranian-flagged commercial vessel is now carrying a blockade zone risk surcharge from the marine insurance market, plus the evidentiary record filed with CENTCOM that makes the legal case for the blockade stronger in every international forum where Tehran is contesting it. $18,000 versus $40 million in lost cargo, plus compounding strategic costs. Iran built their entire Hormuz calculus on the premise that the cost ratio at the strait ran in their favor. Cheap provocations versus expensive answers. The SM-6 floor as structural protection for any asset below the $5 million threshold. The Mk-45 broke that model. And here's the math that should be keeping someone in Bandar Abbas awake tonight. There are 73 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers in the U.S. Navy's active fleet. Every single one carries a Mk-45. Every single one has a magazine with 600 rounds. At $7,500 per interception engagement, one destroyer can conduct approximately 80 to 100 warning shot intercepts before requiring ammunition replenishment, at a total ordnance cost of roughly $750,000. Against Iranian tanker cargo running at $30 to $50 million per intercept, the cost ratio is 5,333 to 1 in the U.S. Navy's favor, 5,333 to 1. That is not a marginal tactical improvement. It is a structural inversion of the attrition equation Iran has been operating under for 20 years. The surprising part of this engagement is not the Mk-45 itself. It is that this option sat on the forward deck of every Arleigh Burke ever built, and apparently was not in Iran's ROE modeling until a $300 illumination round lit up their best tanker at 3:35 a.m. 50 years on the shelf. Never fully costed. Let me give you the ground-level picture, because the tactical picture on Truxtun's displays and the view from the Iranian coast that night are two different stories running simultaneously. At 3:20 a.m., a coastal radar operator at the IRGC Naval Monitoring Station on Abu Musa Island picks up Truxtun's course change on the ZJL 2004 surface surveillance radar. He has been tracking the destroyer for 6 hours. Truxtun has been stationary on his scope for most of that time, holding her picket position in the median zone. The course change to 285 is flagged. He logs it, patches the track to his officer of the watch. The officer of the watch pulls the Sapir Star's track from the Iranian maritime picture. He sees immediately what is happening. He has a Noor anti-ship missile battery 2 kilometers north of the monitoring station. The Iranian copy of the Chinese C-802, 200-kilogram warhead, terminal sea skimming approach, range 120 kilometers. He has a targeting solution on Truxtun. He has authorization parameters that permit engagement in defense of Iranian territorial waters. He does not fire because the Sapir Star is in the gray zone. If he fires a Noor missile at a U.S. destroyer in the median zone in defense of a tanker threatening disputed territorial waters at 3 a.m., he has unilaterally escalated from a maritime interdiction probe to a direct kinetic engagement with a U.S. Navy surface combatant. The response to that is not proportional. The response to that brings down an entire strike package on his battery, on the Abu Musa facilities, and on every Iranian naval asset within 60 nautical miles that can be tied to the engagement authorization. Iran's cost calculus is the mirror image of the U.S. calculus. Their high-end assets, the Noor batteries, the Ghadir-class submarines, the Houdong fast attack flotillas, are as far above the proportionality threshold as the SM-6 is on the American side. Both sides were trapped below their engagement ceilings. The difference is that below its ceiling, the U.S. Navy had a functional tool that cost $7,500. Below its ceiling, Iran had a $40 million tanker that was already turning around. The coverage of Hormuz deployments tends to focus on the high end: carrier strike groups, Tomahawk magazines, SM-6 depth, FA-18E strike packages loaded with JDAM. That is the expensive deterrent layer, the force that prevents Iran from doing the things that would end the blockade by force. A Noor battery that fires at USS Truxtun does not survive the hour. A Ghadir-class submarine that launches a torpedo at a U.S. surface combatant does not survive the day. But deterrence is not enforcement. Deterrence prevents escalation. Enforcement turns the tankers around. And enforcement, in the current ROE environment, lives below the deterrent layer in a zone that Iran never fully mapped. The Mk-45 engagement is enforcement, 6 rounds and a $300 flare, no JAG opinion, no CENTCOM escalation, no Security Council exposure, no above-the-fold headlines in any Western paper. A routine maritime incident report filed at 400, classified as standard blockade enforcement, quietly uploaded to the CENTCOM dossier that gets presented at the next international forum where Iran contests the blockade's legality. Every intercept documented, every violation recorded, every turnaround time-stamped, GPS tagged, photographed under 1.4 million candle power. Here's the take that some of you will push back on in the comments. The $300 illumination round is not just a turnaround signal. It is a legal instrument. The U.S. Navy is building an evidentiary record, interception by interception, that makes the blockade progressively harder to challenge in any international forum. Each documented violation, here is the vessel, here is the position, here is the cargo, here is the response within graduated maritime force guidelines, adds another layer to a legal case that Iran cannot easily counter. The missiles deter, the flare argues. Iran does not currently have a good answer to either. There is a detail in the aftermath that tells you how quickly the tanker community processed what happened to the Seper Star. At 3:37 a.m., the tanker reverses course. Its AIS transponder, the same one that was transmitting intermittently earlier, comes back on full broadcast at 3:39 a.m., as if the captain wanted his course reversal to be visible and logged. AIS data is publicly accessible. Marine traffic aggregator websites that commercial operators, insurance underwriters, port agents, and shipping brokers monitor around the clock picked up the Seper Star's track. A 280-meter tanker on a course toward the Hormuz Gap, making an abrupt course reversal at 3:37 a.m., followed by a return track toward the Iranian coast. That signature is readable to anyone who knows what they are looking at. By 6 a.m. local time, the bridge teams on 3 Iranian-affiliated commercial vessels that had been staged near Karg Island with navigation plots that would have taken them toward the southern lane had received updated routing guidance from their charter operators. None of the 3 vessels filed a new course toward the gap. They did not need a phone call from the IRGC Navy. They did not need a formal notification from the Blockade Enforcement Command. They needed the AIS track of the Seper Star showing a course reversal at 3:37 a.m. and the open source knowledge that an Arleigh Burke DDG had been holding in the median zone. Put yourself in the position of one of those bridge teams for a moment. You are a merchant mariner. You are employed by a company that operates under commercial contracts. You are not an IRGC officer. You are being asked to thread a gap between a declared U.S. Navy blockade line and an Iranian coastal baseline at 3 a.m. in the dark, knowing that somewhere in that median zone, there is a destroyer that apparently does not restrict its response to multi-million-dollar missiles. The Seper Star's course reversal told that story more effectively than any radio broadcast could have. 3 tankers stayed in port. The blockade held for approximately $18,000 in total enforcement cost. The Truxtun engagement opens a question that changes how you think about Hormuz going forward. The Mk-45 warning shot doctrine works under one specific condition. The target is an unarmed or lightly equipped commercial vessel that cannot escalate without crossing into a proportionality zone that costs Iran more than it costs the U.S. What happens when Iran changes that condition? We spent some time going through commercial satellite imagery, Planet Labs and Capella Space datasets released over the past week. And one pattern is visible at the Bandar Abbas Naval Base. 3 Houdong-class missile boats have been repositioned from their standard anchorage pens to a forward staging area closer to the strait entrance. The Houdong is a Chinese-built fast attack craft, 42 meters, crew of 14, Armed with C-802 anti-ship missiles, top speed 36 knots, unit cost approximately $12 million, Iran operates between 10 and 15 of them. If the next cargo attempt runs with a Houdong escort, the engagement geometry is completely different. A Houdong missile boat is not a commercial hull. It is not covered by the civilian registry ROE constraints that prevented SM-6 authorization against the Seper Star. An IRGC naval asset actively providing armed escort for a vessel that is violating a declared maritime interdiction operation is a declared hostile participant. The authorization floor drops. The Mk-45 goes quiet. The AN/SPY-1D phased array hands off to the Mk-41 VLS. The SM-6 comes off the shelf. The cost ratio flips back to 10-1 in Iran's favor. And Iran will accept that ratio if they can demonstrate that the U.S. is escalating against Iranian state military assets, which hands them a narrative victory that the tanker threading alone does not. This is the decision being made in Bandar Abbas right now. Accept the new enforcement reality. Unescorted commercial vessels in the gray zone get turned around by a deck gun and a $300 flare. Or force escalation by adding IRGC naval escort, which changes the legal character of the engagement, brings the expensive tools back into play, and bets on the political costs of SM-6 employment against Iranian state military assets being higher than the U.S. wants to pay. Neither option closes Hormuz, neither option opens it. They just change which side of the cost ratio the next engagement runs on. The U.S. Navy's strategic position at Hormuz right now is better than the public picture suggests, but it is fragile in one specific way. The Mk-45 doctrine closes the gray zone for unescorted commercial probing. The SM-6 and FA-18 deterrent layer closes the option of direct kinetic escalation. The blockade holds, but the blockade is holding a closing, not an opening. The Strait of Hormuz is not moving petroleum. Every day it stays closed. Shipping insurance premiums climb. Asian buyers are finding alternative routes. Caspian pipeline flows, Russian Arctic export corridors, Saudi Red Sea terminals. Some of those alternatives are permanent reroutes. The longer Hormuz stays closed, the smaller the economic consequence of it staying closed becomes, because the global petroleum infrastructure routes around the bottleneck. The U.S. Navy can enforce the blockade indefinitely. The question is whether an indefinitely enforced blockade still accomplishes the political objective it was set up to achieve, or whether it has become a static enforcement action in a corridor that the global market is already working around. The Seper Star got turned around at 3:37 a.m. The math of that engagement ran 5,233-1 in the U.S. Navy's favor. And somewhere in the Karg Island terminal, there is another tanker, fully loaded, with a captain who has read the AIS tracks, made the calculation, and is waiting to see what IRGC Naval Headquarters does next. The gun on the forward deck is loaded, the flare magazine is restocked, and the $300 engagement that may have changed the cost architecture of this entire blockade was logged as a routine maritime incident report at 400 local time, one line in a daily sitrep, no headlines. That is what enforcement actually looks like. Subscribe to Navy Powerline, because when the Houdong boats leave the pen at Bandar Abbas, we will show you the full escalation equation. Every system on both sides, every cost calculation, before anyone else runs the math. Comment equation below if the $300 flare changed the way you think about what this blockade is actually built on.